Yeah, I learned this last weekend. Bipley. Okay, do you know what that is?
Bipley?
Yeah. Ball in pocket, lost interest. You can just pull a Bipley whenever you want. Whenever you're just like about to get a snowman, you can just pick it up.
That's funny.
Hey,
Yeah.
you know that terminology too. Snowman.
That's right.
Tracy doesn't know
snowman.
about snowmen, but
I've had a couple.
there we go.
Lifetime.
Well, Tracy, welcome. Tracy Hanson is with us
Yeah.
today. Welcome to the locker room where we break down sermon stories and scripture for the race of our faith. Haley Humphrey is also around the table with me and Libby. Haley is Quinn's wife. She runs our social media extraordinaire. How long have you been at Crossroads, Haley?
20 years.
20 years, since the
Since
very
the beginning.
Since the
And how old
beginning.
are you?
I'm now 27.
So since you were 7.
Yep.
There we go, through and through. Sometimes you'll see Haley back in the booth on Sunday mornings helping Quinn run sound here. But Tracy, we're so excited that you are here, not only because you love Jesus, you have an amazing ministry. Even just looking on your website today and yesterday, seeing how God has used your story and now redeemed so many aspects of it to serve other people is just awesome. But let's just start with who you are. So for those of you that don't know Tracy, Tracy played for 16 seasons in professional golf on the LPGA. When was your last season?
My last season as a full-time playing professional was 2009.
Okay.
And I only played a couple tournaments that year. And then now I'm actually a senior golfer.
There you go.
So I play a few senior events.
So at some point I'll be joining you. Because I say, after every hole, I say it's straight to the LPGA for me right after this. I love golf.
Is there a certain amount of tournaments you have to play on the senior tour a year to keep your card?
No. So the senior tour is separate from the LPGA tour.
Okay.
I'm forever an LPGA tour member because of the amount of years I played and the amount of tournaments that I played each year. The senior tour, we have a limited number of events. It's been kind of one of those up and down things, so we kind of play in what we can, what's available.
So could you technically qualify this year for like the U.S. Open if you wanted to, if you went through the steps because you're a lifetime member?
Well, the U.S. Open is totally separate.
Oh, yeah, because that's USGA.
Yeah, USGA.
Okay, but PGA?
The
No?
LPGA.
Yeah, LPGA.
Well, I'm called a retired LPGA Tour player,
Okay.
so I have deemed myself that I will not try to play an LPGA event.
Cool. Well, do you have any like favorite moment that you can think of right now from the LPGA?
Yeah, I actually want to give you 2.
Yes, do it.
Do it.
So
Can't wait.
The first one is a little bit has some grief and sorrow attached to it, and it was 1998, and so that's my fourth full season on the LPGA tour. I lost my mom in May of '98 to cancer, and so I really was kind of lost for the next couple months, really faith and golf wise. And about 3 months after she died, I found myself leading a golf tournament in Minnesota, ultimately tied for first, so then had to go to a playoff. I lost the playoff, but really what happened is it was kind of like God saying, I still got some life in you. You're going to be okay. And I was just as excited about playing in the playoff and losing than actually winning the tournament because I just knew that this was like kind of the door opening back up to some hope.
Wow.
So that's the first one.
That's awesome.
Side question, because I grew up in Minnesota. Which course were you playing?
Rush Creek.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
I caddied at Interlaken. They had the 2008 U.S. Women's Open there.
Yeah, that's a great golf course. I haven't
Yeah.
played it, but it's in the historical kind of cycle of courses.
Yeah, so I was actually a standard bearer with Annika's last U.S. Open, so that was pretty special. And she eagled from over the pond her last hole in in her U.S. Open career. So that was pretty.
So
cool.
unless we're all golfers, we have no idea what you just said.
Annika Sorenstam is arguably one of the best female golfers of all time. Would you agree with that, Tracy?
Yeah.
Okay.
For sure.
Yes. So she's Swedish. Mm-hmm. So there's also that special connection, for a lot of the Norwegian Swedes
Tryg
up in
is
Minnesota.
also-
So she played at Interlaken. A lot of my Swedish neighbors were very excited.
Right.
West Michigan is Dutch, so people get excited about Dutch things.
Right. I was talking more about the eagle.
Okay, an eagle. What's an eagle, Tracy?
An eagle is 2 under whatever the par is for the hole. So if it's a par 4, it's a 2. If it's a par 5, it's a 3. But if it's par 3, it's a hole in one.
There we go. Yeah, and she made a 3 on the par 5 ninth hole, which was playing as the 18th that week. All right.
Okay.
That's enough of that.
Love that. Okay, story number 2.
Okay, story number 2 is actually a USGA, US Open story. And I think it was around 2004. And US Open out at Pumpkin Ridge in Oregon. And I was playing with Michelle Wee, who was a 14-year-old phenom at that point. Not necessarily enjoyable for us pros to be playing with because of everything that came with her. But third hole of the first day, par 3, 124 yards, small, crowded, kind of in the trees, about, I don't know, maybe 1,000 people watching on live ESPN, hole in one.
Yes. So that's an eagle.
That is an
3,
eagle.
hole in one. I love it.
Hole in one. So it was on TV. I got, was in the top 10 plays of the day for ESPN. And it was just like the amount of electricity that went through the crowd and the hole. It was pretty exciting.
Do you have any other hole-in-ones?
I have 7 total.
Holy
Wow,
cow.
that is just unbelievable. If you have ever picked up a golf club and tried to swing it and hit the ball, this tiny little white ball, you know that a million things have to go right in order for you to even make contact and not top it and dribble it. But to get a hole in one, that's just amazing.
Here's a little bit of
Outstanding.
hope for all those amateurs out there that the majority of hole in ones actually are not a perfect golf shot. So you can actually make a hole in one and it not be your best golf shot.
There we go. Hit it a little fat or thin.
Yep.
That's a lot. That's good hope right there.
That is.
That's
So
a piece of good hope. What about anything embarrassing? Have you ever had anything embarrassing happen on the golf course?
Yeah, and it was self-imposed. I actually broke a club over the top of my head in
What?
anger.
Oh, over the top of your head now. Oh, like with both your arms? You
Yeah,
just
just snapped.
Can I ask what led to that?
It was down in Charleston, South Carolina area, par 5, pretty straightforward 9-iron into the green, and I faded it, went in the water, and
And you were just mad.
Were you
I
having a
was
day?
mad.
Or was it just that?
It might have been kind of a mediocre
Yeah.
day. It wasn't like it was a terrible day, but I was just frustrated with myself, and I didn't mean to break it, but I had a little bit extra surge to the bend, and it just snapped. So I was embarrassed because there was people watching. I was embarrassed because my caddy has to, be with me after I do that, and then I don't have my 9-iron anymore.
Yeah, because you can't just get another one.
Right.
I remember watching, I don't know if it was the Masters or what, but there was a golfer, a gentleman who ended up like putting with his 3-wood or something because
He broke his putter.
his putter broke.
Yeah.
Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
It was so
it's
funny to
happened
watch.
many times.
Oh, yeah. Those are my
Anyway,
favorite.
Haley, have you ever played golf?
You don't want me to.
Okay.
I do great in the cart.
Okay, good.
I'm very good at clapping and encouraging.
Good.
She hits
Perfect.
a bigger ball that bounces
Yeah,
instead of that
she's-
little white ball.
100%. They're both white, and Haley is a volleyball.
In the past, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
In
a
my
college
previous
volleyball
life.
player. So
So I want to talk about that because obviously you're very skilled at golf, and that requires a level of athleticism.
wait, can I just interrupt one more time about something embarrassing?
Yeah.
Because I know you might not have a lot of embarrassing moments, but I've heard from people that play with you that they have a lot of embarrassing moments because the guys will get up to drive like from the blues or whatever, and all of a sudden Tracy, it's her turn to drive, and she like goes back to the blacks and just crushes the ball, and the guys are like, "Oh, brother."
Yeah, usually I try to play about where the guys are playing, but most of the time it's more of like, well, aren't you going up there?
Yeah.
And so they don't think that I can play the same tees, and then I outdrive them from the tees that they're playing from.
Yes, that's my girl.
Ooh,
Yeah, that's right.
That makes me nervous.
We'll have to get you out with Tryg. Yeah.
That's one thing that I can do, drive the ball. I'm not very, I love golf. I mean, I grew up around golf, but I wish it
Okay,
was a lot
I'm
better.
really sorry I interrupted. Keep going. What were you saying?
No, I was just going to say, so I was an athlete, Haley's an athlete, Libby athlete, and you're an athlete. And so I think we can all talk and understand a little bit of what goes into that, especially in America. When growing up, it's a big deal, right? We put so much pressure on kids to be good. Not every family, but a lot of families, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's just kind of in the water. That's something that we want to excel in. So could you kind of describe how you fell in love with golf, what it was like when you were young to discover that, man, I might be really good at this?
Yeah, it's a pretty loaded question, really. We could have a 5-part series on this topic. For me, I was a natural athlete young. So I played some softball and some co-ed soccer. And then we lived on a little 9-hole golf course in Idaho, and my dad played. And so at first I didn't want to play, but then I started playing with him. And at first I didn't really like it. I got really angry. I was a little bit of a hothead. But I ended up playing a tournament when I was 10, 9-hole tournament, shot 63, and I won the trophy. And it was really bringing that trophy home to my dad and seeing the delight and joy on his face that it was like, oh, maybe I could do this, and this would be a way to connect with my dad, and people liked me because I brought a trophy home.
Yeah. So what was the result of then you start walking down that path of pursuing that feeling that you had when you were winning?
You think it's more the love of that feeling or the actual love of golf?
I think the beginning was the love of that feeling, like the need for that feeling, because as I've gotten older and started to understand my family of origin more, that there was a lack of emotional, unconditional, just love and support. Now, some of that's perceived, some of that's real. I was also a basketball player. And so I was also starting to play basketball about the same time. And so I had these both, and I grew up in northern Idaho, very similar to Michigan weather, snow in the winter. And so I played basketball in the winter, golf in the summer. And so both places became this place where, one, I was a good athlete, so I had a lot of success, and I gained my skills very quickly, which then also brought those accolades and trophies and wins and getting noticed. And for me, I wouldn't have been able to put words to this back then. It also kind of became a mask where I could hide because I was also very shy. And I was a good student, worked really hard because that was expected of me as well, but I could hide behind all those
accolades.
Yeah.
So that's kind of your sports environment as you're a young kid. Was there any faith involvement from your family, and what was that like?
Yeah, we did so I have Scandinavian in me. I'm the Norway side. And so, Scandinavians are good Lutherans. Yep. And we did the Lutheran confirmation classes, 6th, 7th grade. I'm not sure why. My dad had kind of grown up in the Lutheran church, but we didn't go when I was little. So I'm not sure why they chose to do this with my sister and I.
Really quick, what is confirmation? Like, what does that entail? Like a class or
it's like 2 years of going to like some classes, but some retreats, learning about the Bible, learning about who Jesus is. And then you get to a point where after you finish the 2-year program, you get to go to your first communion in front of the church and all that.
Okay.
And then you're confirmed in your faith.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then
that's what the word.
You can take communion after that.
What's the Dutch? There's a Dutch equivalent, profession of faith, where you get interviewed, I think, by the elders or whatever, and you go through some classes, and then you have to come before the board and make a profession. But that means that they've questioned you and tested you. So
I memorized all the right answers.
Yeah.
I knew how to get through it, and I would say that it changed nothing about my view about who Jesus was to me personally. Like, it was just an activity that I had to get through.
So there was no active faith in your life at that point?
No, I think there was just seeds planted. There was kind of a knowing of like, oh, yeah, there's God. And then in high school, we kind of stopped going to church, and my sports really became the center of my family.
And you have siblings?
I have a sister that, and then we had a half-sister that did not live in our household, but my older sister kind of lived in my shadow.
Okay.
So I was the good student. I was the good athlete. She was a cheerleader and sang. But things really kind of focused and centered around what I was doing.
Did that cause friction within the family? Or your relationship with your sister specifically?
I'd say my sister and I had a good relationship. I think we didn't really talk about it. And and she also had feelings that she didn't share about it.
Yeah. No, I can resonate with that in some ways. My younger brother was a better athlete than me. He grew taller before I did. He went through all of those milestones.
Yeah.
So being the older brother that was, had the younger brother 15 months younger, super close in age, I can see how that would... we didn't talk about it either.
Yeah.
I certainly didn't want to admit that he was better.
Have you guys ever talked to your siblings about it? Had this conversation?
Well, now, yeah.
Okay.
Me and my brother are believers, and we can talk freely about those things and stuff. But so... Anyway, back to you, Tracy. So you go through high school. Are you starting to get looks from colleges at the major Division I level, and what was that like?
Yeah. So this is going to get a little convoluted into a lot of different pieces of my story.
Please do. And if you want to intertwine the faith pieces too.
Yeah. So it really has to at this point.
Totally, yeah.
I had a coach throughout like all 4 years that I played basketball under. And then he was our golf coach. So he didn't teach me golf. He just was our golf coach that took us to matches and stuff like that. But he was my basketball coach for 4 years, JV and varsity. And he's the one that really helped develop me as an athlete and gave me vision and goals. And like as a basketball player, our goal was to win state championship. And by my senior year, he's like, you could be the player of the year. We can win the state championship, and we did it. And so I really had to come to a crossroads where I had to choose between basketball and golf. At this point, I knew there wasn't really hope for me beyond a small college to play basketball, and so I ultimately chose golf. But he also helped me this is before, social media and internet, and so being able to, you had to actually physically send things to coaches, like VHS videos.
For those of you that are listening that don't know what that is, it's like a 5 by 9 plastic,
looks like a brick,
black brick of literal film.
Quinn's going, what's a VHS?
What's a brick?
What's a brick? Anyway.
Yeah. So he helped me, send things out. And in summer golf really was more important for me to get recognized by coaches, not high school golf in Idaho. And so there were some coaches that saw me play in some of the national events. And I was an average player for the nation because growing up in North Idaho, I don't play 12 months out of the year. But I did have some coaches aware of me, starting to look at me. I sent letters out. And that was really because of him. And he also started talking to me a little bit about God. And he also was grooming and manipulating me into a sexual abuse situation, which I never talked about or named until 20 years later. So that was all happening at the same time as I was getting done with high school and getting ready to leave for college, which I ultimately accepted a scholarship at San Jose State University in California.
So you have 3 major things coming together in your life. You have a really traumatic situation. You're figuring out your faith through this person who's also perpetrating abuse on you. That had to be unbelievably confusing. And you're about to step into something that only a very small percentage of kids even dream of doing, which is play in a Division I sport.
Right. And I was leaving a town of 2,000 people and going to the metropolitan area of the Bay Area. So feeling very lost. And so I did the prayer, said the prayer on my way to college, still in the midst of this relationship, as I named it back then. And so I didn't go looking for help because I didn't know where to look for help when I got to school. And so I went right back into performance on the golf course and in the classroom.
Was that just a way for you to numb the pain, or did it help you forget? What do you think?
I think both.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then it was at the end of my freshman year that Athletes in Action came and talked to our team. and gave us some information. And so I checked the box, like, check in with me when we get back in the fall. And so then I started getting involved with Campus Crusade for Christ and Athletes in Action. And that's a whole nother story. Like, there was so many good things about that. Like, it really shifted the trajectory of my faith. And it also kind of opened a door for another place to perform, and that was to perform for Jesus now as a Christian athlete.
Yeah. So are you saying that in the negative sense or in the positive sense?
Negative.
Okay. So where now I got to show God that I was worthy of his saving type thing, or
well,
God, you saved me. Thank you. I want to show you how.
I think it was a little bit of like, oh, this is comfortable. I know how to perform, and so I'm just going to perform for Jesus now. And that means I can't really talk about this relationship that happened, because and part of it is in one person in Campus Crusade, I tried to tell the story, and it was more of like, well, let's pray for forgiveness, let's read your Bible, let's go to church, let's get you discipled, rather than actually saying, ooh, we got to stop, and like, this is abuse, and we want to get you some help.
Yeah.
And so it was just kind of pushed away and overshadowed by, oh, well, you're a Christian now, and the old is gone and the new is here, and you're a new creation, and let's teach you how to be a Christian.
Wow.
You can go from being a professional golfer to a professional Christian.
Yeah. Well, I wasn't even a professional golfer yet. So then when I became a professional golfer and a professional Christian, like, oh boy, watch out.
So
I'm so sorry, Tracy.
Yeah,
I'm really
you.
sorry. Yeah. We kind of hear these stories, I feel like, more and more coming out of the sports world, where women are victimized in different scenarios. And I know that, we have a lot to talk about, but I know that you also have started a ministry that's come out of your experience. Talk a little bit about what you're seeing. Like, do you see more and more of this coming out? Like, you're dealing with athletes all the time. And then I want to know what could that have, Campus Crusade person that you confided in, what would have been the better, just from your experience? Like, because I know a lot of us engage with people all the time who are either victims, or we're victims ourselves, or trying to walk alongside someone who is. Like, what's the better response?
Yeah. Well, I'll start with, let's start with that. What would have been the better response? So what I needed was her to say, I hear you, and let's get you some professional help to talk about this and name it correctly. Name it as abuse. And give me space to talk about how that's impacted me.
So you didn't have a name for it yet?
No, I did not call it abuse at that point.
Because you've referred to it as a relationship.
Right.
So you were...
Yeah, and so I just carried on. And so for the next 20 years, my entire career, college and professional, it was just something that I dealt with, and I moved on, and it kind of ebbed and flowed, not the actual relationship, but him as a person kind of would show up in my life every now and then. And so it was just something I pushed away. I didn't tell my family. Nobody close to me knew what happened. And so it was a secret that I had to hold. And I think that is when we try to hold things in silence and secrecy, that's where the enemy actually gains power over it. So what I needed was her to just say, hey, I see you. Let's talk about this. What do you need? How can I help you get the help that you need? That is, and then so jump forward 20 years. I leave the tour. I'm on kind of this mental breakdown of exhaustion. And I had a bad back, too, this whole time. I had back surgery out of college, and so I played my whole career with a bad back. So I was just worn out.
Yeah.
In all ways, physically, emotionally, and mentally. And then I'm like, oh, I just need to rest and recover, and then I'll be fine. I was still in that performance mentality that I'm going to be fine. I'm going to be fine. And it was about 2 years after leaving the tour, which is my place of performance. I no longer have that mask in front of me that I realized I'm not okay. Through a series of people, women, I end up in counseling. And it's through counseling is where I'm like, oh, this is what I needed back then. And that's the door opening to
And you hadn't done any of it?
Mm-mm.
No counseling in 20
No.
years? Okay.
So how old were you at that time when you first started that process?
39,
Okay.
38, 39.
So this is 20 years of pushing the pain down.
Yeah.
Wow. And then the beach ball just...
Boing.
Yeah.
I mean, it showed up in a lot of different ways through, I had 2 broken engagements, through just not knowing how to do relationship well, not believing that I was worthy of love, relationship, that I was the damaged part, part of it, or I'm a failure, I can't do this, I don't know how to communicate, all these emotional factors that come with suppressing abuse.
So can I ask a question to that? So would those feelings generate a desire to work even harder in your craft, to like this vicious cycle where you just, I'm going to work harder to prove to myself that I'm not those things through golf?
I think yes, and maybe to put it a different way, if I'm succeeding at golf, then I'm okay. When I'm not succeeding at golf, then I'm not okay.
So the Lord takes away golf when you're 39, and all of a sudden you're left sitting there having to look in the mirror at,
Yeah, and I really didn't look in the mirror. There were 3 women who reflected back to me where my heart was hurting.
So
And it was
can you talk about
women.
those women and how important that was for you?
So you didn't really open up to them. They were just like, Tracy, what's going on? Like, we want to, tell us about that.
Yeah. So I was doing some neurofeedback with Dr. Royer. NeuroCore was in this area. But I was talking with his wife, Amy, and we were having this online chat conversation. And so, now it's like I got the computer screen in front of me, so I have a little bit of a barrier, but I started to open up to her, and because she was asking me questions, because she and her husband had just kind of walked through my last broken engagement with me.
Okay.
And so she was asking me some questions, and I started like, do I want to tell? Do I want to say something? And so I started sharing a little bit more, and she was the first person that named sexual abuse. And I'll say, like, at first I'm like, no, I don't think so. I'm not that person. So I had to kind of let that marinate for a little while. And then another lady, Kay, came into my life, and she's a deep well of a spiritual older woman who we just developed a working relationship, and then she kept invading my personal space, is how I like to say it. And I'm like, get away from me.
Yeah.
But she just noticed that, like, I talked about my faith, but I was really empty. And so she started pursuing my heart. It's like, hey, let's do a Bible study. Let's talk about who you are in Christ. And we did a study around Romans, and I'm like, this is all great, but what about this situation? What do I do about him and this story? And then she's like, oh, okay, that's out of my realm of expertise. She introduced me to a third person who, for over a 45-minute lunch, I felt the most heard, the most cared for, and then that person is who I started counseling with. And her name happens to be Tracy as well. So it was through that process that I was finally willing to risk diving deeper. And then not only did I talk about the abuse, but I also learned about my family of origin and what was there and what was lacking and how that impacted me, and how I've done life out of both of those, good and bad, in all of those situations.
So what have you learned about how human beings operate out of their wounds?
That's a big question.
It's a big question.
I think,
but I mean, that's the heartbeat in a lot of ways of your ministry.
Yeah. Let me sum it up this way. So as children are really good at observing and really terrible at interpreting truth. And so kids learn to survive, even in good families. They learn to navigate the world in a way that they can best fit in or be seen. And so that might be taking the role of the comedian in the family. That might be the role of like the one that's going to like make sure everything's cleaned up.
Peacemaker, yeah.
Yeah, or maybe it's the rebel, right? Like they're causing trouble because they want attention. And that's not a bad thing if you know that that's happening. So children learn to survive. We exit childhood, and now we're adults, and we still operate out of those survival skills, which is covering up some kind of wound. And that could be anything from neglect to there's just a lot of kids in the family, to the parents were divorced, or a true extreme abusive situation. So as adults, those survival skills don't work anymore. But we still try to live out of that, and then our adult relationships don't work. They're crumbling. We have heartache, or we, just suck it up and keep going, and then we don't really consider why we're doing what we're doing or how we do relationship.
When you say they don't work anymore, which I agree with, but what normally is the impetus for adults realizing that those survival skills don't work anymore?
Yeah, it could be to the level of vulnerability that we're willing or able to enter into with our intimate relationships, and that could be family or romantic, spouses, friends. It could be in working relationships, not knowing how to do conflict, not knowing how to listen well, respond well, articulate. It could be emotional IQ. A lot of kids who are wounded will get stunted in their emotional growth and development. And then we're in an adult situation, but we're actually acting like a child.
Wow. Can you give us an example of that?
I can give you some. No.
Well, no, I'm this is very fascinating to me.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. So, say here at the church, you all are on a team, you're working together, and one of you have a tendency to get wounded if you feel like somebody overlooks you. And what happens then, how old do you feel at that moment? It might be like, oh, you feel 12 years old again.
Yeah.
Well, a 12-year-old shouldn't be sitting at the table of adults running a church. But that's the part of that person that's showing up to the meeting. And that could look like either passive aggressive, silence, withdrawal, or acting out and being interrupting, or like an elevated disagreeing type of behavior.
Wow.
I want to go back to something you said that I think is fascinating, because I think we can all relate to it, is that you had golf going, and then when golf went away, that's when you actually had the impetus, or even the space, or however you want to verbalize it, to actually start dealing with some of these things. And it sounds like it was kind of a God thing too, like just the right people at the right time. But I think a lot of us do that kind of a thing where we have something, probably not golf for most of us, that's a distraction that we kind of go to all the time in order to avoid maybe those deeper issues that may or may not surface at different times. And so I just love that you said that, because I think anybody listening can say there's something that I definitely go to and avoid. So how did you know that? Because like I'm the kind of person that's pretty happy-go-lucky. Like I'll just do whatever sounds fun. Not that that's a good thing, but that's kind of me. And how did you know you were avoiding something? Do you know what I'm saying? Like what was in there that just had to come out? Like how would someone know that they're using something to cover something up? And did you know you were using something to cover something up?
Yeah. I don't think I knew until I had somebody else help me understand what was missing. And for me, a lot of that missing was that I could only get so close to other people. Like there was I didn't know how to have really good, honest conversations. It's not like I gave other people what they wanted or needed, because being an athlete, a professional athlete, is very selfish oriented. Like you have to be selfish to be a professional athlete. But there was just this level of being able to do relationship, whether romantically or friendship. Like I always felt like I was the problem. And like I was never so and then I had a lot of loss through my family, through cancer and death, and it kind of got to a point of like, well, nothing works, so why should I even love anybody? Or so I'm just going to keep my distance.
Yeah, that way I can't get hurt.
Yeah. So there's that level of disconnection, and really it's not just disconnection with people, it's also disconnection from Jesus.
Yeah, so talk about that a little bit, because you said that you had one friend say, Tracy, you love Jesus, but you said that she basically said, but you seem really empty.
Yeah. And I wouldn't have known that. Like I was doing all the right things as a
religiously,
Christian. Yeah. I'm like, and I was using my Christian platform as an athlete to share about Jesus, but I never talked about the really, really hard things. Like I never was, there's a phrase in kind of our counseling world. It's like, are you willing to be more honest with the truth of your story? So there's that level of like, let's tell the truth, but are you willing to be more honest about telling the truth? I had none of that. Like I just was like kind of blank and dead inside and numb, like really.
So
numb.
when you say that, you say like you're telling your story and you're saying good things, but you're like watching yourself tell the story. Like, what does that mean if you're not?
Well, so I told the story of like life before Jesus. I found Jesus, and then I, grew in my faith, and I've had these ups and downs just like everybody. And I also kept Jesus at arm's length. Like you can have this part of me, but you can't have all of me. And that's not how Jesus does relationship with us. And he patiently waits, thankfully, for us.
So you actually have a quote about this on your website where you say the abundant life Jesus offers is a both and. When we grieve the broken areas of our lives, we can hold in one hand pain and in the other goodness. Can you elaborate on what you mean by that?
That was such a great quote.
Like a great
quote.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Holding pain and goodness.
Yeah. So up until I started counseling, and really probably like until the second year of counseling, it was either this or that.
Yeah.
It couldn't be both. And here's a story that kind of might help explain. So when I started counseling, first couple months, my counselor is like, I'm just so glad you're not playing golf anymore. I'm like, me too. Somebody finally gets it. Because everybody else is like, what do you mean you're not playing golf anymore? You're still in the prime of your career and blah, 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 blah. And nobody cared about why I stopped playing. So I'm like, yeah, somebody's on my page. And she was the one that helped me understand that the abuse wasn't my fault and just really helped me find that deeper understanding. Almost a year later, to the month, she's like, well, I'm thinking it's probably about time you start thinking about golf again. And I'm like, whoa, stop. Like a year ago, you said you're glad I don't play golf. And I wasn't quite ready to jump back in. I think I had played about 5 rounds a year those first 3 years that I left the tour. Now, I played over 300 rounds a year for 20 years.
Wow.
And I went down to like 5, and 3 of 5 of those rounds I got paid. So really I only played 2 rounds because I chose to. So I'm like, what do you mean? Like, and she's like, well, you've done the work to hold and to name the harm. Now let's start doing some of the work to name and hold the blessing.
That's
and
so good.
there's harm in sport for me, and there's blessing. There's harm in my life experience, and there's blessing. That's the both and. And it wasn't really until I started to get to that point where I really started feeling like I was wrestling with God. And so the
Jacob story.
Jacob at the Jabbok, and I've stood on the shores of the Jabbok on a Jordan trip, and it's like that's when I felt like my faith was really becoming more real. And and like being able to wrestle with Jesus and give him all of the mess, and that he's like okay in the mess. And it's the both and. There's good and there's bad.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I just feel like it's so much easier in our lives to put things in boxes and label it with one thing. Because we can keep it tidy. At least we think we can by, okay, this is all bad. This is all good.
Yeah. Well, and the Christian culture is like, well, you can't feel bad because then you're not honoring who Jesus is. If you have Jesus in your life, then isn't everything good? Like, take every thought captive to the Lord, renew your mind, the old is gone. Those are all wonderful truths in the right context. And that Jesus himself talks about the suffering and like, it's not that he wants us to suffer. It's like we will suffer and we will go through hard things. And, not but and there's also goodness and blessing and joy. And
Well, I love that she encouraged you to go back and play golf. And I see that when you were talking, it just reminded me of like the redemption of a season of life that was painful. And then you did the work and then you could go back and just have it be redeemed in a sense, that all that work and that Jesus was with you that whole time.
right.
Whether or not you were, if you were keeping it at arm's length or whatever. And I love you also say on your website that God is a gentleman, like he's not pushing his way in, but he's there. And so she's just pushing you to redeem that part of your story and re-enter it as like a whole, healed, not perfect, but integrated person.
Right. And at that point, I wasn't eligible for the senior golf tournaments yet. And so I started playing more golf socially, more for just enjoyment and relationships. And I did. I started to find some joy in the game again. And you asked a question like, when did I first love golf? I don't know if I've ever totally just like been in love with golf.
That's astounding.
Yeah.
For the amount, you know what I mean? The amount of time and the effort and the gifts that you
that's
have.
true for a lot of
Yeah.
professional golfers.
I mean,
though.
it's the burnout of sports, right? I mean,
Yeah. And even my start was not on the premise of just the love of the game. And I do have a love for the game at
Of
the
course.
same time, right? So that those first few years after counseling, as I started to play more golf, I wasn't thinking about competing again, but that's where like my ministry work came on board. And one, I never dreamed or wanted or even had an inclination to do ministry or anything relational. Like I'm a shy introvert.
Yeah.
So God,
that was evidence of God working in your life.
Exactly. Like God
that
does
was a
have
miracle.
he has a sense of humor. And so part of that redemption of golf is like he tapped me on the shoulder and said, I've given you a gift. I've given you all of this experience. Do you want to use it to do something bigger and greater that's beyond just me as a golfer? And so then then also where the place where I got missed as a young college kid, student athlete, that's where the foundation of my ministry is being able to insert myself in these young athletes who need help, who need to talk about their stories, and that the hope would be that they can play their sport with more joy and less stress and anxiety.
So you had some stats too on your website about your engagement with young people and the amount of people that actually have had the same experience you have in one way or another.
Yeah. Do you want me to quote some of those?
Yeah, give us some of the stats.
Some form of abuse happens to about one out of every 3 girls. And you have the sources linked here too. I think is this CDC or
I don't remember where we grabbed
I think,
those.
Yeah. CDC. And then 1 out of every 4 boys. That's crazy.
And it's probably worse.
Yeah, because those are reported.
Yeah.
And one thing we know for sure is that it's underreported.
Yeah.
So
Because you didn't, if
I
your
didn't
story,
report.
yeah, exactly.
yeah.
So most of your work from the counseling side, though, focuses on trauma, right?
I'm a trauma-informed lay counselor
Yeah.
and somatic experiencing therapist or practitioner. So it is trauma-informed. It doesn't mean that every conversation I have is just around trauma.
Yeah.
And so some of the girls that I talked to, even just so I spent some time with the Epson Tour girls, which are the ladies trying to get to the LPGA Tour. They don't have a lot of resources out there, so I'm a nonprofit. I raise all my own money so that I can go and be of service to them for free. And so I just show up, and I don't call myself a chaplain because I want non-believers to feel welcome to talk to me. And so I really just start engaging with them at where they're at, loving on them, listening to them. Sometimes we talk about, hey, I feel anxious on the golf course. Can you come walk a couple holes with me?
Wow.
Great. Some want course management help. Some want actual, I'm depressed. I've got this going on. Can we talk about that? So the conversations are all over the map, and I don't force any spiritual conversation. I let the Holy Spirit lead that, and when the spiritual conversations are opened up, then we can engage spiritually.
So you're doing some of this while you're literally just walking the golf course.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Wow. Doesn't
That's
God have
cool.
a sense of humor?
Yeah.
I mean, isn't that amazing? Because some of my best conversations happen. I'm a bad golfer, but I still have great conversations. That's why I love
I'm
so
not
much.
playing during this.
No, yeah, of course.
I'm
But
just walking
you're
with
with
them.
them and you're able to consult with them on their golf game, but then as you slowly unpack in
build
conversation.
relationship, and I might ask about family. I might ask about what else is happening in your life. How's travel? How are you handling being on tour?
So can you share any testimonials of breakthrough, or, and you don't have to use obviously their names or anything, but give us some stories for a flavor of what this actually looks like.
Yeah. So I will say I've had several conversations for girls who have been playing out there 4, 5, 6 years, and they're like, what do I do with my life? Do I keep trying to do this or do I not? I don't know what else I'm good at. So that would be one conversation of just helping them understand that they have so much more about who they are and their abilities beyond just swinging a golf club.
Yeah.
And then some of those girls have left the tour and have gone on to really find places or jobs that they've been surprised about. A more recent one last summer, I have to be careful with the context, but talking to the girls like, hey, I just have so much anxiety on the golf course, and it's really impacting how I score. And so about 3 conversations, we just a little bit first started like, okay, tell me about the scenarios on the golf course. And then the second time I saw her and talked to her, I just talked about the country she came from because she's an international player. And I just suggested some things like, well, there's a lot of trauma in the environment that you were raised in, that you were born into, that your body has held a level of sympathetic charge, which is that hyper arousal or that fright or flight response, since probably she was in her mom's womb. And so you just take a body nervous system that's already been in this trauma state for 20 years, and then now they're on a golf course where they have to perform, and that they have very little flexibility in their nervous system.
Wow.
And so just bringing some understanding to that. And she's like, I never even thought about that. And then the third conversation was, oh, yeah, well, I remember when I was 6, 7, we had a tutor. And we were in the garage, and he made me do some things. And that was the third conversation. And so just being able to be with her in that was the first time she has told anybody other than maybe her mom. I think she told her mom that she had named that. And so in 3 conversations, she felt safe enough to be able to name that to me. And so I could just be with her in that and put some truth around it.
Wow.
It's amazing.
And then how many of these conversations end up, obviously, I love your disposition. You're like, I want to be here to listen first. But how many of these conversations actually end up in a place where you can share your faith?
I think for me, I share it a little bit in bite-sized pieces.
Yeah.
I might say, well, I'm a Christian faith-based. I don't know where you are or if you have some kind of faith, but we could talk about that at another time. And so that's just a little drop. Or I might say, well, this is how, like when I played on tour, this is how my faith helped me. So it really depends. I'm a firm believer, and really a lot out of my own story, because I was kind of forced early, like, well, you're going to get discipled so that you can go share the gospel. I needed care before I could go share the gospel. And I'm a very big proponent that we put our Christian athletes out there on the podiums and expect them to be able to share their faith way too soon and too early. And it's actually harmful to them as an individual. And so I really believe in you have to build relationship first to earn the right to share the gospel.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I want to go back to what you said right before that, though, because I think you're right. Like we do put an unbelievably high expectation, especially within the evangelical community, on athletes who happen to be Christian. Mm-hmm. And even the way that we talk about them, oftentimes I'm like, we're pretending like the athletic part is more important than the Jesus part. Mm-hmm. And we they become almost tools that's got to feel pretty dehumanizing as well.
Or both the Jesus part and the athlete part just kind of like endorse each other. Make this person super Christian and super athlete, super human.
Yes. Yeah, you're
and
right.
We expect them to, every time they achieve, it's about Jesus. But when they don't achieve and they fail, they can't be angry or heartbroken or sad.
Because glory be to God.
Yeah, like all good things will be worked out for the goodness, right? And so we do I like that. I don't know if you said dehumanize.
Yeah, we do.
We make athletes not human.
Yeah.
Like they're human beings who are playing a sport at a very high level in front of a lot of people, and they need to be able to be human. Now, they are role models, and so there is a level of responsibility that Christian athletes need to hold as a role model. But if we're just expecting our Christian athletes to just give glory to God when they make a touchdown or make the final shot or win a golf tournament, we're missing the mark.
Yeah, because we only see them in those arenas.
Yeah.
And that's what they get reduced to.
Yeah.
And so they have stories too, just like you had a story. And the more that we play that game, the more that we collectively as a culture are telling them all the things that led you down to 20 years of blinding yourself and not actually addressing wounds in your life because you were taught that you could outrun your problems by performing.
Yeah.
So I want to talk a little bit about that idea of performance. Why are we so hardwired to perform, and how does the gospel combat that?
That's a good question. I would put words around like I think God's created us to pursue excellence.
Of course.
Right? He put us on earth to work and to the original story of taking care of the garden, multiplying, all those things. But like there's this innate I think created desire to pursue, to do, but that comes out of being secure and rested.
Yeah.
And so the pursuit of excellence I'm all for that. It's the process. We tend to get so result oriented that we forget that it's a journey in the process of learning and growing, and that maybe this will help. I've always struggled with the word identity. Like your identity's in Christ. I'm like, what the heck does that mean when my identity's been in golf or my grades for 40 years?
You're like, not me.
I don't get it. Like just saying that my identity in Christ means nothing to me because of my lived experience. Now to other people that might mean like totally like really the essence of who they are. So there's a gentleman that does Olympic ministry. He's a reverend in the Anglican Church, and the way he is teaching athletes is we're always wanting to do something for Jesus. Whether you're an athlete in the business world, a mom, teacher, whatever it is, we're always got this question of like, what can I do for Jesus? It's the wrong question. What does Jesus want to do in me through what I get to do, whether that's being an athlete or something else in life? And so what is it that Jesus is doing in me through sport, through my golf? And then as he does that work in me, then the natural flow is to take it outward. But we get it the other way around, and it really messes with us.
Yeah.
So for your story, you started with golf, and then you went through a healing process and then went back to golf. So you were kind of, in a sense, reversed. The process is reversed. Like first you do golf, and then you figure out what Jesus wants to do in you, and then full circle, what does he want to do in you through golf? It's kind of like backwards for you. But sometimes we say at Crossroads that, well, we all have the same mission, right? We're all believers in Christ, and we all want his kingdom to come in our own lives and the lives of others. But our assignments are all different. So we have the same mission. Your assignment is now golf, in a sense, or female athletes, I would say, that you get to then walk alongside them and show them that they can get that reversed back the correct way. Because I love what the gentleman said, the Anglican priest, that's so right, because we're so hardwired to just achieve acceptance by performing. And like you said, it's not just athletes, it's all of us. What we do is what kind of allows us to be loved.
Right. Yeah.
And that's so detrimental and so backwards. It's so opposite the gospel, right? Because the gospel is like, you don't have to do anything.
Yeah.
You're just loved.
Yeah. And it's this whole senior golf thing for me is like, it's been a journey, because when I played my first senior event, and I think I wrote a blog about this in the aftermath, but I'm like, hey, I've been through all this emotional healing. I'm in a good place. My faith is in a good place. I'm doing ministry work. This is going to be easy. Holy smokes. Like, it all blew up. Like I shot, I don't know, 79, 82 or something like that. And I was so angry. Like all the old expectations and the anger and
Came
the
roaring back.
hatred, everything, the self-sabotage, self-contempt, it all came roaring back. And so even now, I'm 5 or 6 years into the senior golf stuff, I'm still experiencing this, what is God doing in me through golf as a competitive athlete?
There's some sanctification. Golf
It's
is
still
sanctifying.
working.
Hey, it's sanctifying in my life. I hate golf, but I love it at the same time, because
I think every professional feels the same too.
and it depends on the shot. It could be two, this hit one shot. I love golf. Hit the next shot. I hate this game.
Well, I love what you're saying, because I feel like it's something anyone can take away when you get into a situation where expectations aren't being met. Either expectations you have for yourself, or expectations you've had on other people, or expectations you have in a scenario. Your question can be like, God, what are you trying to do in me? Not the reaction of the disappointment or what you can actually see with your human eyes.
Yeah.
But God, what do you have in this disappointment or in this frustration? What do you want to do in me? And that's such a great question for us to ask ourselves, because all of a sudden it becomes about us growing in our walk with the Lord, as opposed to stepping into situations which is human reactions.
Right. Yep.
Difficult to do.
So there's a whole new generation of athletes coming up right now, with new challenges. I mean, just look at our college football, not just college football, just college sports scene in general. It's changing in unbelievable ways with NIL and
social media,
transfer portal stuff. Like something that was already hyper individualistic has only been given more fuel to become more hyper individualistic. I'm going to get what I'm due right now.
In it for me.
Yeah, exactly. And so, how do you see that, and what are kind of the unique challenges of the next generation of, we'll just call it American athletes for the sake of our context, but...
Yeah, I think, social media for sure is just caused so much of this comparison. And then even how athletes are being brought up through youth sport right now, this level of entitlement that it should just be given to them. They only have to do so much work. Like, I went to college underneath a lieutenant colonel from the Air Force. Like, there was no babysitting, no hand holding. Like, you get yourself prepared and you be ready to compete. Today, these college kids, like, they need to be babied. And I'm like, you need to do what? Like, you have to, like, some of my friends that are coaches. So that's a huge thing. Social media, the comparison, which is causing all these extra or not extra, but deepening the level of emotional and mental health struggles of athletes. And then the NIL and transfer portal, I am starting to believe that it could be the very ruin of NCAA athletics if it doesn't get under control.
Mm-hmm.
And that was like a little basketball shot there in the background.
I made it too.
So I think it's a double whammy. The athletes are experiencing more pressure, more expectations through the social media, transfer portal, and the NIL, and then they're also becoming more entitled. In the transfer portal, like these kids go into there's certain situations that are like totally like that makes sense.
Of course.
Right.
Coach leaves, you were promised one thing, whatever. But there's other kids that are going through the transfer portal because they just didn't fit in, or they weren't getting the attention, or they didn't get the playing time. And so instead of asking like, well, what do I need to do? How can I work harder? How can I get better? They're just escaping through the transfer portal. And so that's not doing anything for their emotional growth, intelligence growth. And it's causing havoc for coaches.
I couldn't even imagine.
Yeah.
Well, and that's why it's really important, actually, that people like you are involved in this whole arena to walk alongside people like this. What's the actual name of your ministry?
The Tracy Hanson Initiative.
Mm-hmm.
The only reason why my name is in there because of me as a golfer, it kind of draws attention. But the more important word for me is initiative, a forward-moving word that says we can make some change. We can help people. Let's give athletes a better environment to actually potentially play sport without experiencing trauma.
Yeah. But I think going back to that NIL stuff, it's actually, as you were saying it, it's kind of a parable of sorts of your life and what God has shown you, that to actually grow, we have to look at the hard things. We can't just escape and go to comfort.
Amen.
Right.
We can't just keep moving to what's easiest. Sometimes we have to stop, slow down, hold the good in one hand and the bad in the other, hold the blessing in one hand and things that are broken. And that's what your initiative seems to be all about. Like, how can we help people heal and grow or not encounter the trauma in the first place through actually holding those two things in tandem?
Yeah. A lot of my retreats, actually all my retreats right now have been all some kind of sports leaders, whether it's like an athletes in action, FCA, coach type person who they come not, some of them don't even know they have their own story of wounding. And so they're leading out of their disconnection of their own self. And then they're coming to our retreats and they're having aha moments, and they're having like, oh, wow, somebody actually understands what I'm feeling and experiencing. And then they get to go back and it's that multiplication process. They're meeting with 10 to 100 different athletes, and they're leading differently because they're getting more in touch with their own self and their own story. And that's probably been the biggest surprise of the ministry work, because I'm like, I want more athletes. But athletes are getting impacted by serving the leaders as well.
I love that. And so work as worship, you do a certain work and you have a certain assignment, like I already mentioned, but it's really worship for you. It's there's a higher purpose. There's a glory that's coming to God. So thank you for being faithful and just stepping into a unique arena that you are uniquely gifted, and God has positioned you to speak in that specific space. And I would just encourage everyone who's listening, like, that we all have unique giftedness and specific passions that God has given us. And if you didn't do that, no one else can do it like you do it. And God has specifically gifted you and called you to that. So thank you for filling that gap in the world for His kingdom, for Christ and His kingdom. I'm just thankful. Tell me a little bit more about the retreats. So how often do you do retreats, and
Who are they for?
Yeah, who are they for? How many people come to those? Like, what does that look like?
A couple different ones. Typical group is 6 people, 2 leaders. Last year we did 4 retreats. One of those retreats actually had a male group attendance. The hard part is, like, if we're serving sports leaders, finding the right space in the calendar that these leaders can come. But it's 6 people, 2 leaders. It's about 7 sessions of what we call an intensive story work. And we just kind of like we give some psychoeducation along the way, and then we invite them into their stories. And we're just a group of people bearing witness with one another.
So do you know Matt Kenny?
I do.
Yes, because this sounds very similar to the story retreats he does.
Yeah, so we were both
ministry.
involved in the ministry years ago together. That was a small group healing ministry, and so the concept is kind of
similar
out
vein.
of that.
Yeah,
I've just tweaked it and created some of my own. It's not my own material. I've just tried to take some of the best material out there and assimilate it into a receivable for these coaches or leaders that they can then learn from and take away. But.
Yeah. And for those listening, Matt Kenny is our adult and family ministries pastor and leads men's ministry where he leads story retreats.
Yeah.
So look those up.
I think they're called retelling retreats.
Yeah.
And I just noticed in the EMU, which is electronic mail letter or something, I don't know what that stands for, that there's one coming up, actually.
Yeah.
So it's limited space, but you could sign up if... we all have this stuff. I mean, you're specifically, like we said, working with athletes, but we all come from brokenness.
Yeah.
Because we live in this world and there's brokenness.
Yeah. We all... I'm a firm believer, and I think Matt would say the same, is that we all can use not just therapy, but just people who are willing to enter into those vulnerable spaces with us.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, and this is what discipleship looks like. I think sometimes we overcomplicate things, or we think that discipleship is like a program that we run, or something that we have to drive our car to, or a coffee date. But you're discipling people in the interests that God has already given you, the gifts that God has given you, and you're just there doing what God has called you to do. So, for me, that's such an encouragement, because I have such a deep conviction to demystify discipleship. Like, we overcomplicate this thing. Like, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. You're just leaning into the space that God has called you to be in.
Amen.
With the talents that God has already given you, and saying, okay, here am I, send me. So I'm really excited. For those of you that are interested in more of Tracy's work, it's Tracy Hanson, SON.com. Check out her website. Just some really encouraging things on there. And all of your golf accolades, which I loved reading about too as a golf nerd. So, you were on the European tour, it says too. Rookie of the year.
I played 5 tournaments in 1994 and earned Rookie of the Year out of those 5 tournaments.
Let's go.
Yeah.
And then what brought you back to, or I guess, what brought you to Holland, Michigan, if you're from Idaho?
As we sit out and look out the window with the snow coming down.
So I played college golf in California. My first year as a pro, I lived in Arizona, but I was paying tax in Idaho. And I realized that if I moved to Florida, I didn't have to pay state income tax. So I moved to Florida. And then I met a friend that used to come out to our Christian fellowship on the tour and sing, and she was from Holland. So I started visiting Holland, got to build a little bit of community there. So when I left the tour, I didn't want to live in Florida full time. So I came north.
Some seasons?
Yeah, I like the north. Except for Michigan would be like the perfect place if it had real mountains.
That's true.
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree. Love the mountains. Well, Tracy, has been such
so
a
much.
gift to have you.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing your story with us.
Of your story. And if anyone is interested, are your services just for professional athletes?
No, I mean, yes and no. So it depends.
That's the lane that you're in.
It's my lane, but I also work with a golf ministry called Links Players Ministry, and I'm not opposed to co-laboring with other facets of life that would need counseling services or story work or those kind of things.
Love it.
Thanks.
Well, this has been great. Appreciate you. And Haley, thanks for being here as well. Love having you at the table. It's great. Well, this is the Locker Room, where we break down sermon stories and scripture for the race of our faith. If this podcast has been serving you, hit follow and the notification bell. Follow us on Crossroads Locker Room on Instagram. Give us a rating, and please share it. We love you. Have a great week.